At the same time, urban was not easily accepted. As I mentioned here, it was viewed with a profound ambivalence as a spurious Western implant. It was seen as if it was an imposition from the West. And post-independence, the 1947, India has hardly been urban. Most anything of urban has been in the colonial during the British rule or the Mughal rule. But after independence, there has never been a focus or a concern for urban. The political leaders or the industrial leaders used to live in urban, but the concern was always rural. And if you see, the Ministry of Urban Development was formed as late as 1985. So till that time, it was a concern for rural. Urban just happened to be an extension of a village ideology. So the ideal life was an acre, a house, and a cow. That was the ideal. And therefore to develop means going to urban area, and the urban seemed to be a dream where it would improve the quality of life. It is with those aspirations that the migration to the urban areas was. So we had two different ideologies. One was the Gandhian ideology, one was the Nehruvian ideology, and people were aware of both the leaders. Gandhian ideology represented something that village is the focus, or the focus for progress and development, as against Nehruvian ideology of a social democracy and an emphasis on a lot on industrialization, but not really on cities either, except Chandigarh, which came as a little exception. There's a different story to it, but really no thrust on urban. So the whole idea of market, in which case colonial, was to limit, like we have in Delhi, a Connaught Place, markets were limited, they were not spread. As against the first example I showed you, where markets were spread, they occupied every little space in the city. And British idea of markets was to be consolidated. Everything had to be having a limit. And the tools used for development was the master plans, which was an imposition because it was essentially a derivative of what was happening in the UK. And they were imposed, they were abstract, and they were unreal. So a typical urban plan, this is one showing for Ahmedabad, use obviously land use zoning as a tool and technique. The city center, which is shown as red, was never detailed out because it was always shown as a blob, as an unresolvable problem. There was not meant to be development for the old city. It's only the recent policies of the government that words like urban renewal or urban conservation have started becoming a part of their vocabulary. But till then, urban development meant extension of the cities and the newer parts of the cities, never the old city. So the abstraction resulted into what they call as an ordered planning. So it has to be something like a renewal would mean gobbling up the existing, seemingly messy kind of a fabric to produce an Euclidean geometry and claim to be an ordered development. And all the terminologies used were essentially economic terms like center and suburb, low and high density, congestion and speculation. These are the kind of terminologies used. So the whole idea of city being an abstract and not concerned with a human being per se was the focus for their thinking. So that landed up with developments like Nariman Point in Mumbai, which now they're trying to so-called humanize that place. So Indian cities were seen as therefore chaotic, messy, yet spontaneous and vibrant. Therefore, the question still comes: is it urban or are they overgrown villages? The Metropolitan Report of Mumbai, for example, showed that what you have on the left-hand side as a guided development, which obviously is preferred, and the one on the right they refer to as a haphazard urban sprawl. So something messy was never seen to be something positive or something good, and they could never understand whether there is a system or a logic to the seemingly chaotic development of the Indian urbanism. So Bombay the beautiful they felt was is no longer beautiful. They felt their whole notions of beauty was like Baroque. architecture where everything has to be uniform, coherent. Uh, it cannot have simultaneously varying forms or systems, and therefore this notion of beautiful still continues even now. This is as old as about 2.5 months, when we had the vibrant Gujarat, is like a world, like a global convention to promote industries, and the municipal corporation authorities were instructed that slums have to be hidden away. Slums are not beautiful. So they landed up putting huge boards on the main arteries to hide away. So slums are not considered beautiful, and therefore the whole idea of beauty is still that Baroque idea. And it followed, they said after slums, even the hawkers had to be removed, the dogs had to be removed, and the cows also had to be vanished. So then the city becomes beautiful. So you see, the whole idea of the notion of beauty is extremely European, trying to be imposed in a condition which is really not Indian. So India still believes in a simultaneous existence of all. So even there were these sketches of Dhaka, these were like satirical sketches showing how open spaces can be abstract and unless occupied by the Indian scenario of multi modes of movement and various people occupied for various users, it becomes difficult. Abstraction still continues where land is looked as a commodity, obviously it is to be sold. So any depressions or variations in the land are seen as aberrations. So municipal corporation would use them as garbage dumps, will fill it up, defying the natural lay of the land. Will have water clogging during monsoon. So one photograph is from Mumbai, one is from Ahmedabad during monsoon. So water goes where it is not meant to go just because one has disturbed the lay of the land. So abstraction goes even to the point where one doesn't accept ground realities and the nature of the land. And the conventional perception of the urbanity was is a place where is meant for specialists, where raw material from the hinterland is brought in, processed, and again sent out. An idea of a city being limited. So you see the green belt. This is from Ahmedabad. A green belt is supposed to be limiting the city, which is again not fundamentally in the Indian conditions, where you have example cities in the south which had an integrative kind of an approach, where the city center had a whole host of small towns surrounding the main one, and there was a symbiotic relationship between the small towns and the larger towns. So it was a larger integrative effort and not a city to being limited and existing as in isolation. Another example is a recent new capital called Naya Raipur. About 10 years back, it was built. It's a new capital of a newly formed state, and it was a fantastic opportunity for them to have made a point of what is an appropriate Indian city, having learned lessons from Chandigarh or Gandhinagar here, but unfortunately no lessons were learned. So this is showing the lay of the land, the location of villages, their interconnectivity. Again, the problem being not integrated. Water bodies, the water channels, lay of the land, the villages, and they form one layer. But the authorities would come and put one more layer, which is this grid. A layer on top of it, not necessarily taking into consideration the existing site realities. So it becomes an abstract idea of a new town. They still continue with the idea of sectors, which really have never worked in India. They work with phasing, and phasing also is shown as sector. But cities never really grow in India like that. They would work with, if you have seen village clusters here, they would slowly expand and they would happen as incremental growth, and an overlying hierarchy or structure would slowly get fused with it. But you cannot begin with it. And I think Gandhinagar and Chandigarh illustrate the failures in an extremely clear manner. So this was in Naya Raipur and Raipur. And the idea of villages was they didn't have any plan what would happen to the village in course of future growth. They said surround the village with open space, build around it. So in a way, the villages become suffocated and they don't sort of aspire to so-called develop. They need to be frozen. So that's the unfortunate kind of an attitude. But this still continues as back as only 10 years. And they come up with typical neighborhood concepts do not work in India the same way where sector and neighborhood are not equivalent. We have neighborhoods but not equivalent to a sector, and a sector here is defined by roads on all the four sides. And this is the kind of dwelling units that they propose. And the neighborhood idea is still extremely archaic, where the center is supposed to be a green space, the corners are meant to be community centers or religious places. Center would normally have a green space at a school, and you'll have varying kind of income group housing. And unfortunately, this is a concept of a neighborhood dated 1929 by a person called Clarence Perry, who came up with the idea of a neighborhood. And you can see the striking similarity of the diagram for the neighborhood done in 1929 and what you've done now. So the concerns therefore become, in all over the world actually, not only just in India. Traditionally, disputes have been primarily over land, property, money, or women. There are three reasons why people fight. And that's true world over. Is it true in Spain? I don't know.
Yes.
Right? So there are three reasons why they fight. So territories are then to be consolidated, defined, marked, claimed. This is done by streets, gates, posts, and they are manifest in various ways. And globalization claims that now there is no differentiation. It should be a free flow of movement of goods, of knowledge, of human beings. Unfortunately, finance is moving, but people are not easily moving. So this globalization, flattening of the world is still a concept which is not true. And it is accompanied, as much as it talks of homogeneity, it talks of an opposing trend of consolidating territories. People have become even more narrow-minded, the herd mentality, where one would concentrate or focus on becoming little more like a concept of a ghetto, where territories get even further defined rather than opening up. And therefore, if urban design, our major concern being public realm, right, then what is the arena for urban design and what is the agenda for us becomes the major concern in all the presentations. The loss of public realm has been, even Europe has gone through, India also. This is a quote from a lady called Anna Arendt, who written a book called The Human Condition, the loss of the public realm, and I think the illustrations are quite clear to show how inhuman the kind of a public space, a public realm tends to become. Am I doing fine? Yeah. So, in the Indian conditions, the traditional neighborhood would have a more graded public realm vis-a-vis the contemporary part of the city where the public realm would not be graded. So it would be a private and public very sudden, while in the older fabric you tend to see a more distinction or gradation from public to semi-public to semi-private to private. There will be a lot of gradations. I think that's something very particular, the kinds of gradation in the Indian context. So normally a figure ground is showing black and white, so we'll only show the black as built and the white as open. And knowledge plan of Rome went further to start carving out public buildings as white to say that it belongs to the public. So all the churches and public buildings were depicted as white as being part of the public space. But in the Indian condition, then we have innumerable tones of grey. An example I'm showing you is in Jaipur, the central square. That is, which is what is the Palace Square, which was very private, had a very strong edge condition to it, was impregnable in a way. So you have two diagrams, one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left shows how the yellow, which is part of the public, has been restricted only to the edge, and now it slowly starts seeping into the central quarter, and how there are grades or gradations of varying degree of public and private. Right, there's an existing palace complex, and there were elements in the past which marked, for example, the Hawa Mahal you might have heard, was where the queen used to come only to a point, and the relationship with the public and the private was very controlled to a screen. The public edge which controls, well, it makes the temple accessible from the major square. Yet the continuity of the shops on the ground floor see that the public edge is retained. We also have a public realm. This is in a place called Hardwar. So a lot of the mythology and religious rituals which demand a lot of space along the water edge, as what are called as ghats, are there also is an expression of the public realm. This is in Banaras, which is also showing the public realm. The edge of the water and the land, as referred as the ghats, is a home for innumerable activities and very, very ritually oriented. There's also one more view of Banaras city which shows the public realm. I'm showing you various expressions that public realm takes in our context. The streets can transform on a ritual, and the entire street can be taken over to meet a certain festival which might be yearly. Public realm can also mean quiet moments, individuals, not necessarily large gatherings, but it could mean being on to oneself, small gatherings. This is a pole that you have already visited, the neighborhood in the old city. I hope you visited by now. Right? So this shows, if you see the gradation of white to the black, and shows you the gradation of the public to private relationships. So the grey, if you see, the house is shown as dark grey, which is a private realm. It has a courtyard which is a little more public comparatively, and as you come out on the street edge, you start seeing again a lot of gradation of public to private. I think that is something very critical or peculiar or characteristic of the Indian context. It is the manner, it is not the fact, it is the manner and the degree of the gradation which is what becomes particular. So in terms of an expression, that's the kind of quality it starts illustrating of the public-private realms. Right, more examples to show you from the Ahmedabad old city. We have in other parts of the country also. This is from southern India, where you see the kind of gradations in both the cases. So the degree of participation with the outside would absolutely depend on that particular neighborhood. But in other words, there is a gradation, and I think that's what is important to recognize. Same thing happens in Banaras also. You see a varying degree of gradation finally landing up to most public spaces along the river. These are the burning ghats in Banaras, where the dead bodies are cremated. So that's what the public space. So all the streets would lead to public space, which is part of the inner city is extremely congested, but they get released along the river. The public spaces also get constrained. So typically this is a Parsi fire temple, which will clearly state that non-Parsis are not allowed, even though it's a temple. Are you aware of Parsi community? No. They worship fire, and they have come from the Middle East centuries ago. It takes off from Jews. They are not, but they've taken off from Jews. It's a community which are now in India since for almost 400-500 years, and they have a fire temple. In Ahmedabad also you have Parsi fire temples. So other ways of constricting or restricting are these gated communities which are developing, where neighborhoods will start putting gates to restrict outsiders, so-called. Delhi, the compound wall gets higher and higher, where the restriction from the outside is seen to be more imposing. So now architects tend to do more of design of a compound wall rather than the building, because the buildings are really never seen. We have compound walls as high as 2 stories building. So the whole the architecture along the street changes. Territories are also defined very temporarily. It could be by tying up a certain canopy by which I claim the land underneath that momentarily. It could be for a day, it could be a few hours. And it also happens in South, where you see that street there now. People sprinkle water in front of their house and they do these patterns. They'll clean the front of the house, they'll sprinkle water and they'll make these patterns. The water would dry up. In a maximum 1 hour it will dry up. But till then, that is what is claimed as to be an entrance to our house, and it is considered auspicious to welcome deity to the house, and therefore that cleaning and religion get merged. But it is claiming the land very, very momentarily. Public realm can also be guided, so therefore right of way can get streamlined to various uses. Visual access also can be a public realm. Now, when I say in the Indian condition, to see what defies globalization, what is preventing to say that we are a flat world, and so these are the issues or characteristics of the Indian cities which impinge on the public realm. And so I'm going to talk one by one and show a lot of visuals. There are hardly any theoretical conception, but each of that can lead, in course of your working in the studio, can lead to very major theoretical positions. As of now, in my presentation, I'm going to only touch upon the concepts, illustrate through graphics or visual material to get across the point. And I think the more you brood over it later, probably it'll start making more sense at that point of time. So one is migration. So I'll go one by one. Migration is rule book versus reality, is image versus reality, simultaneity, sustainability, both social and environmental, local versus global, part and the whole, chaos versus control, and the cyclical notion of time. This is what I'm going to illustrate. Of course, all countries have migration. What is characteristic about each place would be the kind of migration, the period of migration, and the patterns. So, as I showed you in the beginning, the photograph or the visual where people aspire to go to the towns to become become part of the development. So there is migration which is daily. There are people who commute to cities daily. There are people who only seasonally migrate. So when the agriculture season is there, they'll come back to the village, and when the agriculture does not demand their presence, they move on to the city. So even you have that kind of a pattern, and you have a pattern where people migrate for a lifetime. They think they'll come back, but they're there always. But they keep referring to their village as their home and not the city as a home. So this entire transporting with them the entire rural ideology, and that's why it brings back to the earlier question of, is really India urban? And these are all scenes from the cities where are the signs of the rural juxtaposed into an urban condition. This is a photograph from Kolkata. These are some of the earlier photographs. So, if part of the public realm, people tend to literally dwell. Even a place like Mumbai, you're aware of Mumbai? Yeah? So, you have people who specialize in washing clothes. So, even those communities would still continue in a town that we call, or a city we call, as the economic capital of the country, and have contributed to the major GDP of the country. We still have such strong communities within the city. You have also communities who supply milk and who stay with their buffaloes. So there is huge shelters where they rear buffaloes and supply milk to the city. That happens right in the middle of Mumbai. Right? That's the kind of settlement that you have of these people. You see any of these photographs, right from the kind of dwelling, the kind of people, the way they dress, the idea of a religious place that they create, which is not part of any formal structure, but you see how they transport from their rural ideology, living patterns onto an urban realm. The world considered that street vending, as I showed in the newspaper clipping also earlier, is not considered beautiful. So everyone wants them out. The question comes, is Indian streets characterized by street vending or not? And now there's a bill, a constitutional provision for street vending, a bill passed in 2012 which legally allows street vending. So they are there to stay. You and I cannot wish away. The street will be cleaned of all the street hawking and vendors, and we are going to have a very European idea of a street which is absolutely clean and cleared of all kinds of informal sector. This is very much part of the Indian scenario, and now there is also, as I told you, a legal provision. So the question comes, how you deal with the formal and informal simultaneously. The next is what I call as the rule book and the reality. We have fantastic rules, but in reality they are not necessarily implemented. So the difference between when you see and what you think is a rule book. So the rule book says that the cow should be away from the roads. Even the Supreme Court, so the High Court had ordered, but it's still a part of the scenario of the Indian streets. And this is both in Delhi and Ahmedabad. Right, we are allowed 3 people on the scooter, and this is very normal and very common. We also have an act called the Gujarat Regularization of Unauthorized Development Act. So even if it is authorized, it is an act which legalizes the unauthorized development, right? So this was an act in 2011, and even in the adjacent state of Rajasthan, they have done this provision. Recently in Mumbai, they had mapped, before they prepared the master plan, they prepared what was called as an existing land use plan, where they mapped the existing situations. And they found that this, you see all what has been highlighted in this is the map of Mumbai. Each of those dots refer to a discrepancy. That means what is there on the site does not match with the record. So you can imagine that entire city, how illegal the whole thing is. This is what the mapping showed. Including the JJ School of Architecture, which is an institution, was shown as a commercial piece of land. There are innumerable examples like this of that there is a gap between the rule book and the reality on the ground. Yet we aspire, India, we still have not, we are very optimistic. We aspire for global models which are Western dominated. Cities used as a formal economic artifact. We recognize international business districts, corporate headquarters, chain restaurants, signature architecture projects, and distrified localities of tourism. But we also have poverty, we have slums, we have overcrowding, we have poor infrastructure, we have informal economies, we have archaic management structure, corruption, etc. Now, development, as what is being promoted, cannot mean merely catching up with the West or creating a global city. That's the buzzword these days. Become a global city or a smart city. We want to take the benefits of this globalization, aspire to be top of the world, but we do not want to take the initiatives or the lead. And so by default, all the ideology has to come from the West. So we wait, we say this century belongs to Asia, we say this urban is of Asia, but we wait for the ideologies to arrive from the Western context. So what we need to do is we need to acknowledge the local ground realities, culture and people if we want to evolve truly sustainable cities. Next one is what I call as reality versus image. The left hand side, the visual is about the future city as proposed by a developer in Bangalore. It's not from a comic book, nor is it a video game. It is being proposed by the visualization of a developer in Bangalore. All politicians used to go to travel abroad, used to come back with an idea that India should become like Singapore. But now Singapore has been displaced by Shanghai. They say Mumbai should become like Shanghai, and the dream city of choice. But the principle of the floating facade remains intact, and for the city's elite groups, the first world model provides only a look, an appearance, a monumental theatre of self-congratulations, in which the powerful are happy and the weak are absolutely invisible. So this is what happens when we, in the name of development, large-scale projects, infrastructure, you have, for example, this is a case in Bangalore where flyovers come in, they disrupt an existing local economy, a local market. One of the Bangalore is known for flower markets. It disrupts that, all in the name of image making, because they're so caught up that for a city to be developed or called global, we'll have to have a branding. So we need to have, this is Hong Kong, so we need to have images which are like a postcard, picture postcard. Cities ought to be marketed and having an image. So cities have become image making exercises. So, but even there, if you see, people use that as a backdrop to have photographs. People don't engage with it in reality. It's all meant to be as an image making exercise. But one doesn't understand that Hong Kong has its own logic, even though I'm working with image, the ground. Hong Kong is normally called a city with no ground. Because either you move below ground or you move above ground. You don't move along the ground. So they have very detailed worked out map of how the connectivity and the public realm below the ground and above ground is. They have innumerable skywalks, which India is now trying to bring in the skywalk without knowing the realities and the conditions which can make it prosper. But even in Hong Kong, you see the streets are dead because you move only, as I told you, under the ground or above the ground. You have innumerable pedestrian walkways or skywalks, each one linking you with another. So you are dwelling totally at upper level, and you see the quality of the streets at the ground level. They're absolutely deserted. No interface which engages. There is including an escalator which is provided for moving the pedestrian from top of the hill to the main CBD. So all you do is just walk along the escalator, which will bypass all kinds of connections, all local suggestions of engaging. Okay, these are the skywalks, and that's what India now is aping beside the image making. You see the edge of these buildings and their interactive is so dull to the street. So image making continues. Even Sabarmati riverfront, our ex-chief minister is there in the picture now, is the Prime Minister of India, was promoting the Sabarmati riverfront as a project, as a marketing device. And there have been a lot of criticism about the insensitivity of not being integral or integrating the rest of the city along with the nature of the riverfront development. Including, there have been studies done on the ecology part of it, the people and their relationships, and this was a result of a workshop that we did with students from the London School of Economics along with our SET students, and this is an illustration done by them. They see the riverfront project as a cross-section in RCC box which has been inserted into a condition like that. So there has been a kind of a response to a situation like that. We also have a project called Gift City, which is in between Gandhinagar and Ahmedabad. You see that also is under image making exercise. Now it's been termed as the first smart city of the country. It is also being promoted as a hoarding near the airport during the vibrant Gujarat week, the smart city. And none of the buildings are ever going to look like this. You can check with the authorities. None of them were just like image making. Now the entire finance, the conditions change, the build forms are changing. None of it is going to look like, but it's still marketed like this. Not only that, the next one, which is called the Dholera city, which is part of the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor, also is being marketed with this kind of a very anonymous and abstract kind of image making exercise. The next one, what I call is quality of simultaneity. I think India is extremely peculiar to this, where the Indian mind is seen as a very complex kind of a mind which can comprehend complexity and simultaneity very easily. So this is a typical TV scenario where you might have a visual from Haridwar where they are performing a ritual as one of the, you say the most irrational kind of of a thing happening at one scale. And at the bottom, you'll have the latest stock exchange prices as a strip which moves. Not only one, then many times three strips moving. And the Indian mind is able to comprehend the two extremely opposing kind of conditions with great ease. And that's the scenario in the city also, where it doesn't disturb. What seems to be chaotic to majority doesn't seem. People are at peace. There's no problem. So simultaneity could happen where varying kind of principles of structuring. This is for Mumbai. This is the actual principle of the Fort Mumbai, with the borrowed principles of access, a termination, a junction, and nodes. So all of those principles. But if you see Mumbai Old City or the Fort area also is just not a financial center. It is also a residential area. It is also for shopping. It is also host for a lot of informal sector. So in terms of a simultaneity of existence and activities, it is not something where the world cities normally take over from a trading city to a manufacturing city to a financial capital. It is a transition from one to the other. But in Mumbai, everything happens simultaneously. It is still a port city, it is still a manufacturing city, and it's still a financial center. So its simultaneity can be in terms of grains and principles of architectural character, on simultaneity of contrasting visual imageries of economies, of expressions in terms of architecture, of juxtaposition of, for example, the Maharashtra symbol of formation of the state with the Flora fountain, which is a British symbol, Ballad estate, which is Gothic, more Baroque rather than Gothic, more of Baroque principles of obelisk and perimeter defined buildings. We also have the port. As a result, you have large infrastructural structures, but in the lack of housing, you see the strip of housing all along the industrial belts. That also results into multimodal transportation systems. So you have heavy industrial kind of vehicles to private vehicles moving onto the same space. And this is a major connector from north to south Mumbai. And you see how the spillover of the abutting houses are onto that as if it is a localized space. So this kind of a simultaneity of scales of reference is continuously also the coexistence of multiple logics of settlement patterns, all in a very fine, enmeshed in a fine grain, rather than distinct pockets of different type of residential units. So you have the Voli ceiling, which is one of the recent symbols of development in Mumbai, and you have the entire informal sector adjacent. More examples of how they get really, and I think what makes it quite unique is the scale and the grain at which the two get enmeshed. It is not, otherwise in the world, many places you'll have the kind of opposing kind of configurations, but the scale at which they get enmeshed is something very particular in the Indian conditions. For example, in Brazil, you'll have the favelas and you have the formal sector, but they are very distinct pockets which would identify the zones for each. Here, they literally live adjacent to each other. And that results into the kind of informal activities and economies in the city. You also have the use of space in a different way. This is on religious day, the same space, how it gets converted. So the reference are multiple. This is Mumbai, right in the middle of the city, where people are praying, the Muslims are praying, and the notional reference is the direction to Makkah. But these streets get occupied in a way that you would have never imagined. You also have multimodal. We cannot still talk about streamlining and channelizing all traffic everywhere. The multiple, and that's because a lot of land use planning is mixed. All these multiple, we have not been able to segregate everything, both in terms of city level zones to street zones. Now, cities are called as melting pots, but my question is that we have mapped, and Mumbai says it is not a melting pot, but it is a salad bowl. After a point, it refuses to mix. There are clear, distinct ethnic pockets all across Mumbai, whether it's based on religion or language. So this global versus local is a question which continuously emerges, and with globalization, it has not got anywhere homogenized. In fact, as I told you, there is a herd mentality of trying to get together with people of the similar nature of communities, and including the Supreme Court order, which legalizes developers to sell apartments to a particular community and refuse to sell to some other community. So even the Supreme Court sort of encourages the formation of such herd mentality, which I talked about in the past 5 minutes. There is also the celebration of various festivals in a city like Mumbai, where and this is going stronger and stronger. So identity has become more like a badge. It is not a belief. It is to be an outward appearance to be expressed. The part and the whole is extremely important again in the Indian conditions where there is a religious background to it, where the society is not seen as hierarchical but as interdependent. So even if I might be placed lower in my caste group, but I am necessary to complete the entire system, and therefore the relationship between a part and a whole becomes extremely important. One cannot be seen in an isolated way, which is expressed equally by this famous Hindu story on 6 blind men and the elephant, where each one touches a part and they think they know the whole, but they only touch a part. But to say that the whole is much larger than a part, it becomes extremely critical, and that understanding is important. It is very well expressed in a city like Jaipur, where there is a certain consistency, not necessarily similarity or repetition, but a fantastic I would say a correlation with an ideology expressed at the city level to a part. So right from a city to a neighborhood to a unit level, which will show the typologies will express. मैं आपको 5-10 मिनट के बाद करता हूँ. So that idea of coherence and consistency becomes extremely important. The other thing, is highly misunderstood, and in India also it is the question of scales. So the scales of cities are seen like as if they are the size of a dress or the size of. Cities are referred to now small, medium, large, mega. So they are referred to the same way we refer to dresses as a small size, a medium size, a large, an extra large, and extra large. So the whole idea that a city becomes beyond a certain scale has implications in the way we live is forgotten. And the idea of the scale, and now more and more, if you see, at least in the Indian conditions, urban design is becoming synonymous with large mega projects, and mega projects are very difficult to get implemented because they are never integrated. They neglect or ignore a large community and the large masses. Invariably, they land up in problems and the projects get stalled. Very rarely a mega project gets done. So to understand that the scales are equally important, it's important to integrate at a scale which is appropriate to take people into confidence, and that's what the old city of Ahmedabad used to do marvelously, where the decentralized attempt of making decisions worked really well, and not only that, even to control. There's a book called Crisis in Built Environments, an author called Jamil Akbar. He's not on India, but he talks about how decentralization of responsibilities can help organize your neighborhoods much better. So this obsession with mega cities and mega has to really change. And therefore, what is small is beautiful. Now only people say mall is beautiful. Small is not beautiful anymore. So whole our idea of what really is desirable is changing fast in spite of the problems staring so hard at us. And therefore this enmeshing of what I call as a grain or the textures is extremely important. And this happens a lot because this is in Mumbai, where you have multiple kind of goods being dealt, traded, and there's a network of them and interdependent. So, and Jaipur streets also illustrate that. The whole idea of mixed use, what we call the occupancy, the idea of work, the industry and home was never really segregated, and now it is world over is becoming again workplace to work and residence is becoming a hot topic of discussion and how to integrate it. While the Indian definitely had this kind of a fantastic coexistence both in Jaipur or even other towns of workplace and staying together, and the master plans do not recognize this because they still believe in zoning, and you have therefore the non-master plan settlements, any mixed use kind of stuff do not get recognized. The next point is the linear notion of time versus the cyclical notion of time. And this is a conjecture. Maybe there is a lot of literature on this, but probably not enough to tell you very strongly. But so I put it more like a conjecture to say that in the Indian conditions, all the monuments are protected by the Archaeological Survey of India, which is a body which was created by the British. And their idea was very curatorial. It is preservation, more like a museum. But in India, all historic areas are still living areas. They're not mummified. They are not dead areas. It is a life which is evolving. So to think about them in terms of a preservation or a museum purely is extremely irrelevant. And one conception which is possibly a possible explanation, with the way I look at it, is that the fact that in India and even China and some of the East Asian countries believe that time is not linear, that time always comes back. So it's a cyclical notion of time. We have festivals which reoccur sometimes because a lot is based on the lunar calendar. It could be monthly, it could be after a few years we have a festival or a ritual which comes after every 12 years. People believe in rebirth. So everything gets recycled. There's nothing which is ever lost, and that is something very, very fundamental, and therefore the idea of preservation doesn't come very naturally to most of us. So in spite of the government efforts in so many years, I don't think anyone has really taken it to heart and are in a position to believe that anything has to be preserved for the sake of preservation. So the concept which is slightly, I feel, a little uncomfortable for most Indians. And probably it stems from, we have three major gods who represent creation, the other god represents maintenance, and the third god represents devastation. And this is in this continuous cycle that they go through, and there's nothing ever preserved. It goes through a continuous cycle of rechurning. And therefore, when this kind of idea is imposed in Ahmedabad old city, it doesn't come naturally to the residents who have to be convinced about. Now, if you draw the Archaeological Survey of India's regulation that 100 meters from a monument you cannot touch or repair or even rebuild, the entire old city would be full of monuments. You won't have any space to even repair a building, which suppose it becomes so illogical that it's very difficult to implement, and therefore there are all these kind of illegal attempts because it's a living fabric. There are illegal attempts of trying to repair or restructure or rebuild. So there is as much as greed involved as much as a non-faith in this kind of a regulation, which is good. I think this ought to be very seriously questioned, and therefore you land up with such illegal stuff having problems and structural problems. They'll collapse because they're doing in a very illegal, inappropriate way. So this whole idea of that concept of preservation, concept of valuing heritage, I think has to be thought about in a more contextual manner rather than a mere imposition of a foreign idea that it has to be preserved alone. And the last point I have to touch upon is the chaos versus control. Do we want, as I told you in India, do we appreciate the spontaneity and the chaotic nature, or do we want a clean environment? It's almost like the way Disneyland would be, everything is clean and clear. So do you want to control everything? Do you want a little of chaos? People say Singapore is not good because it doesn't have bacteria. You need to have little bacteria to make it a little infectious, a little dirty. Then the cities become worth living. Otherwise, they become too sterile, too boring. So I think that's a question for the Indian conditions also. How much of control vis-a-vis how much of chaos is something desirable? So we people take liberties to take up processions in spite of now the police has said that you need to take police permissions. But whether I get married or whether I take a procession, people many times flout those kind of regulations and take the street as if it's their own. There are examples of people occupying streets, I told you earlier also, but people still believe in them because they say it's a need. So is this chaos or to be controlled? DN Road, Mumbai has come up with quite an old story of certain regulation about arcades being mandatory, superstructures can be independent. This was one form of chaos versus control. Pune has a lot of neighborhood corners where people, Pune is a city near Mumbai, have neighborhood corners. You see a bench there and people would roll up newspapers. You can pick up the newspaper, read it and put it back there. There's a blackboard which would announce the events of the day. So it's almost like a community point, but they're all illegal. The formal master plan does not recognize activities like this. So do they ought to be regularized, controlled, or they be allowed to make cities more humane? This is a more formalized setup of the same, in fact it puts up a board also saying that it is a public reading space. Should activities like this constitute your street edge conditions? And therefore streets become much more engaging with the community and the people. There's one more aspect which has been growing in the last 5 years is the role of the common man. Till now, the governments were very, very authoritative and the masses felt they never had any voice that would be heard by the authorities. And so now this cartoon that is a very famous cartoonist whose person is called as the common man. That's what is the this cartoon that he represents the common man in India. And so this shows that the common man is now flexing his muscles, that has become more powerful and that is demanding the number of government opportunities where they say planning or design will have to be more decentralized, would have to be more participative, more community oriented. It cannot come from top to the bottom as what happened earlier. And the role of the masses is improving and has to be there. The 74th Amendment, about 20 years back, ensured that there was a decentralized attempt of planning and local community participation is mandatory. It never got very well implemented, but now it is growing. So it's something that you ought to keep in mind that without a public participation, which is I think quite popular in the West, here is yet to take off in an appropriate way. It's something you cannot ignore. So therefore, if you want to come up with a development which you think is appropriate and contextual, I think you'll have to listen to the common man, and planning cannot be mystified. What we design and cannot be said that it can be done only by experts. I think it is a lot of common sense which is said by a number of authors, that if people come together and talk to each other, a lot of planning can be done. You don't necessarily require so-called experts to tell you. So the solution could be where one can take an idea of this overall structure. This is a plan of Jaipur, where there is an overall structure within which there are a lot of variations. So what we need now is not small changes or amendments to our master plans and blueprints of development, but we need to conceptually rethink the entire paradigm of development. It has to be something which has to emerge from an understanding of the local conditions, and from there I think the idea of appropriate urbanism or appropriate regional identity would emerge. And that's the point. At the same time, one is saying that one doesn't have to try and put an overarching classification or to say that we have understood the irreducible pluralism which exists in the Indian condition. After a point, you cannot simplify things. The complexity is there, the pluralism is there. You have to accept it. You have to work from with that as a point of departure, and not being scared that if you have to take a position to be able to act, that you're going to permanently freeze it like building a nest. But if something is momentary, it's like an act of kingfisher, one has to act for a moment of time, could be evolved, change in course of time. But I don't think one should look for permanent structures for simplicity in description of a reality or rather oversimplifying reality. Accepting pluralism, accepting the uncertainty, I think one has to act. I think that's what is the challenge in the Indian urbanity. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking with all you said, you talked about all this new way of approaching development and urban design within this development, and with more thinking about distributed and decentralized process and everything. I was wondering, what's the direction that I don't know, the authorities and the ones that have to saying this way, like to commissioning those actions, what's the direction they're taking nowadays in India? Because, for example, in Spain, we see that there's lots of movements, like independent movements of communities or associations that are trying to walk towards this path of decentralized process and more participatory process, but still the authorities and the formal structures are very slow in this adapting to this kind of process. And I was wondering if India is also like that, or
yeah, it is. See, when I showed you the plan of Naya Raipur,
yeah,
it's only 10 years old, a new city, but they're doing it 60 years back. But recently, Mumbai, Delhi have accepted what they call as a local area plans. Mumbai, they have said now that one master plan for such a large area will not work. They are going to come up with regulations which could be distinct from pocket to pocket within Mumbai. And they're asking now that one could prepare the local area plans. It's just the beginning. How effective it is going to be, we're going to wait and watch. But at least there is one positive step to say that each pocket is distinct. Mumbai is too huge. Let's look at smaller scales, and let's look at a scale where urban design, which is just not master planning as a two-dimensional zoning plan, but also qualitative aspects of it, is just beginning. But still there is a gap between what authorities do and what people want. But at the same time, there is no clear, as I mentioned, no clear ideology that India is trying to work towards. It is still, as I told you, still so influenced by the outside sources that some, in spite of all science being there, it has not translated or resulted into saying that we have a very unique way of coming up with a policy for the urban development. We don't have things.
Even the own inhabitants of the places where they don't exactly know where they're looking for and everything.
Yes.
Because, for example, when we went to visit the polls and everything, we were talking to people that visit the polls.
Yeah.
Even people, they were telling us, okay, we we are fine living here, we like it, but maybe we would like to live in a flat or not. So it's kind of, and then when you explain or you just talk to them and talked about how the different is life in a flat, for example, or in the outskirts and life there, they would say, okay, yeah, maybe that's not that what I want, but so it's kind of developing.
I was wondering if hopefully the mainstream ideology claims and accepts the identity of India and accepts promoting participatory development and all that, how can we, all that it has been done already, like these hybrids, communities and 15 neighborhoods, how can we give back this human character? Give back the human character.
How do you give back the human character? Character is already come about. What do you do with that?
How do you manage it?
See, the participative planning is just begun. It has not happened too often. It has not happened in exactly all areas of the city. For example, Yatin himself had worked on in the Kutch area where he worked with participative development. So instances of like that are few. So as a result, it has not influenced the city form in a major way. But suppose having done the mistake, how do you reclaim it back for human? There's a project called, I showed you a slide of in Mumbai. What was that? The PVK is now doing the humanizing. No, not older next to NCPA and all that. What is the area? It was 60s, it was, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name, it is Mumbai. It was based on a gridiron pattern of development, and they said they promised it as the most ordered development, but after 6, it used to be totally vacant. So human beings never liked it. So it became not only undesirable but also unsafe. So now the government has come up with a project, they want to humanize that place. So what they started doing is they started activating the seafront, all the roads, they started re-landscaping them and tried to activate for human beings to stay there after 6 o'clock. So that's what they're trying to do. The problem in India is there's no problem, sorry, the problem is not of people not being there, there are plenty of them. So for us, density is not an issue. It is a matter of if when you say quality of the neighborhood should be good, I think engaging them in the right way becomes, otherwise very rarely you'll find areas which are deserted. You'll always find human beings being there. Whether productively or not is a question, and qualitatively can they be improved, as against a lot of the problems in the Western countries which they say is absolutely deserted, no human beings there, or like the ghost towns in China where there's absolutely no occupants there. That's not the kind of problem that India has. But still qualitatively for it to become more human, so people are taking such examples, and I think that's it's called, Nariman Point. Nariman Point is the example where they have made proposals to humanize the place.
My question is, what is the role of the architect now in India? For example, in Spain, as an example, with the construction boom, there were a lot of contradictions with the politics and the role of the architects, and that's why there was like a mess. But here, I don't know if you have an important role in the city, or it's also about the money, and how is it working now? Like, do you have problems as an architect, or do you have freedom?
No, people have the freedom, but it's also misused the freedom. So a lot of architects, when they work for themselves, whether it might be for profit or whatever, obviously do not contribute to the cities becoming good. Or even if I'm an arrogant architect, I want my building to be like a landmark or signature architecture. I think those architects are dangerous to the society. And those So we have the entire spectrum of such people in the country, where you feel there are some people who are not contributing well enough, and there are people who are trying, but still, as a profession, compared to the extent of construction or so-called active developmental activity happening, architects constitute a minuscule. There are very few architects for the amount of work. So all work do not engage an architect. So everything which is happening is not necessarily through an architect, and therefore we can't even necessarily blame only an architect also, because they are only doing a few part of it. And within the architects, yes, there are all kinds of scoundrels to some very good people. We have all kinds of people. The government has only a regulatory kind of thing which is so minimal and outdated that it doesn't generate necessarily good architecture. It only tells you what not to do. So it is more restrictive. So and it emerged from the 1940s, 50s, when it was more of a regulatory kind of a thing and not a facilitating kind of a thing. So we have, I would say, a similar problem. So if you see most of it when you move around, you might not be very excited to see the built environment. But at the same time, if you see, at no point in history, except during the Mughals, in the absence of an authoritative control, liberties of individual expressions were taken so much that it doesn't, India never talked about if you talk about an open space, a public space here as it is in Spain also, you'll find well-constituted public spaces. The architecture of all the four walls will be done well. You won't find good spaces here. A public space which you say, is it well made physically, you won't find it. It will be very active, vibrant, but not necessarily physically well made.
So in this society we're living today, like that, we all know that it's a market society where everything is valued in what profit it gives. How can we approach and maybe protect all those activities that are not related with productivity itself, with economic productivity, I must say, but still they are needed in the city or even in our society, as in terms of education or staying at home, or I don't know, raising childs or whatever that. How can we manage to protect all those activities that are not related with economic productivity and that they seem that they might disappear maybe, or
if I understand the question, I think there won't be any activity which is not related.
Not directly, maybe. For example, if there's mother that stays at home with his children, or a father, I don't know, and stays at home and keeps the child and everything, like there's a pressure from all the market society and everything to go away and start working, or I don't know, and if it's our role as part of the society, not only as architects but as citizens, to try to protect those activities, or try to configure a kind of a society in which not everything is related to economic profit.
See, for that, an ideology, it is more like a paradigm or a position you need to take towards development, because you are concerned more as a citizen, not necessarily as a professional. Mm-hmm. I think you can't defy change. You can at the most probably alter it to an extent, but it needs definitely then a mass movement. For example, in India we have a lot of people who repair things. People don't throw away things very easily. So I might still have a person who might repair my shoes, might repair my bag, repair my cycle. So people don't throw very easily. But now the market economy is telling you that the latest 2016 model is in, like mobile. So it tells you, please throw away your the earlier model, make it obsolete. Indians is caught, or the Indians are caught somewhere in between, where there would be people who would still believe in recycling, reusing things, not generating a lot of waste. And there will be others who would make everything disposable. Now, it will depend on your position that you take to how much can you resist. After a point, whether I like it or not, my electronic items are made so redundant that even if I want, I cannot continue it. So, right, that's part of the larger market economy strategy of trying to create demand and consumerism, and so I have to create obsolescence. So, as individuals, I think there are people who would still believe in how can we resist it. We may not be able to stop it. So I think there are people who are trying to work like that, but I think that's the way anyone would work, and I think that's the way. So that's why I call these people who repair. I call them they are endangered species. So they are not going to live for too long, but they are so skillful that they can repair almost anything. They have that skill to repair, and in one tenth the cost sometimes. If you, for example, even for a car, if I go to an authorized showroom, they repair the car at a very high price, and I can go to the so-called local guy who can repair it at much lower price. But the idea of this repair and recycling is vanishing.
So we have nothing to do with this
No, not
vanishing.
nothing to. You can participate in trying to promote that, and you pray that your tribe grows. But you cannot wish away the market economy at the same time. So you can say that, okay, I don't want to buy branded shirts. Like I get my shirt stitched. Okay, but you say, how long can I continue? I have to finally go and buy the brands if I want to be called a cool guy, right? Otherwise, I'll be called out of fashion, outdated.
Yeah, and also it's important not to forget that also market has brought too many good things,
Yes.
so it's like a balance in between.
No, I don't know whether too many good things, but is there. In India also we have, when they collect too much of stuff, they have to clear where the money is not in circulation. So they'll have a sale, then they'll have a genuine sale. So all efforts or buy now, pay later, buy one, get two free, all techniques to ensure that goods don't get stored and they come into circulation, money comes into circulation. So you land up buying not because you need it, but because, oh, if I buy one, I'll get two more free. So you land up buying more, which is quite unnecessary.
Yeah, maybe that's like excessive market.
Market-driven economy.
Yeah.
Changing a little bit the topic, how would you change what strategies to protect people living in the boats from these economical pressures, developers, the want to like be high in the center of the port of the city? How could we protect the communities living there and not leading to a gentrification?
See, as of now, the regulations involved are not sensitive to the local needs. If the regulations are evolved which sound, they have to be financially viable. I cannot just say, oh, your house is beautiful, now don't change it. Because they also want to change it and they want to see the economic returns of it also. And I think one has to be practical because the structure is changing. So if one evolves regulations which are more sensitive to the fact that it's a living city and not a dead city, I think it will help. You cannot do it the way we do it in the West. I think as of now the regulations are, but for the FSI being different, are not really sensitive to that need.
So till now, the regulations are only concerned about the heritage buildings and not as much.
Even heritage is very, very vague. In fact, even till today in India, there's not a single city which has proper heritage regulation. Even Mumbai, which was the first city which had got a legal provision for the inner city of Mumbai, they have not evolved what are the guidelines for heritage. In Ahmedabad, it's just emerging as a legal status, but it doesn't spell out what if you do you are good and what if you do you are not good. It doesn't tell you that. So there's a lot of ambiguity.
Sir, have we seen that the sector theory doesn't work in Indian concept unlike in Chandigarh? So what is the kind of guidelines should we follow for future development?
If you see, for example, if you take it as a reference in Naya Raipur, we have these existing villages
Yes,
and they have their existing interconnectivity. They are trying to develop a new city. Now, even yesterday on the TV, now they are advertising Naya Raipur. Have you seen the advertisements for Naya Raipur?
no.
They are welcoming you to come and they are saying that all infrastructure is there, please come and stay in Naya Raipur. So, when I went there, people still continue to live in Raipur, the old Raipur. Naya Raipur is too foreign for them. It is full of good roads. It's good for an evening drive, because the roads are good. One place where you can show off your car. But then it's like a spectacle. You have a look at it and you come back home. The problem being that in India, the cities do not grow or evolve by sector. The way they have planned, they are phasing sector 1 will develop first and then sector 2. But we said, who are going to be the occupants? As of now, they are attracting government employees. No private person is coming as of now. Then there will be the service class, who would be typically be the migrants. And if they come, they are not going to go and live in an apartment which will be provided by the government. Normally, the tendency would be that if in a village, I see that you are my relative, my first thing is I'm going to go and live with you. People say, okay, if you come here, you might get a job. So is the village as nodes which will first take in this exodus of people. I cannot ignore village and their interconnectivity. I cannot talk about this sector. So if I acknowledge the role of the villages and their aspirations to so-called grow and become better or develop, and in that process, the superimposition of a grid network would slowly start emerging or getting engaged with this. As of now, the two are absolutely contrasting. They're talking about BRTS, they're talking about metro, but they don't have that kind of traffic. Maybe it goes of time and requirement. Maybe now buses are enough. Maybe the village to village connectivity is enough as of now. So the whole idea of evolution, except with a pattern which is different. They are looking at the city has to have all these shopping lists that to be called modern. Do you have BRT? Yes. If you have a metro, yes. You have, but they would say, is it required? Is it going to work? Is it the way city evolves? No. So as against the kind of idea for sectoral growth, I think it has to be the nodes which will start expanding, and that will have to fuse with. That's where the answer would lie.
Jaipur is a flying city. Jaipur is a flying city.
Jaipur, yes.
So we can get the kind of influences from that.
A lot of learnings are there from there. It was not built overnight. It was a framework which got filled in later. It got densified in course of time. In fact, I showed the Jaipur to city to Naya Raipur Development Authorities also. And you know what their reaction was? He said, we never realized that we have such a wonderful city in India. This was in a conference in Shanghai on new towns. So I was presenting learnings in the Indian context, and 4 representatives from the Naya Raipur Development Authorities also were present besides the other people. They were shocked. They said, we never knew that we have so much. So was the talk very complex? Yes or no? Complex? Too much to take in? So Yatin will have a lot of questions after a week.
Everyone.
Yes. So I do understand because I have put across a lot of concepts. Each of the concepts can be expanded to one lecture. It is so much. So it will take you time, but anyway, think over. And you can always get back to him for further clarifications. It will emerge slowly. So I don't feel bad if you don't have too many questions because it's not very easy to digest what has been put across. But as long as you recognize that there is some of these issues, I think as you proceed with your design studio, you start reacting to them.
Is there any articles or books on
Plenty of them, but not in one concise way. That's very thoughtful of me. Not in one concise way. Here I put together from a lot of sources, from a lot of work in one concise way. But as I told you, you'll find instances of all these being discussed independently in many of the references. Or as you walk by, you'll slowly start realizing. You walk, you'll be more observant. I think if it even makes you more observant, I think the purpose is served. Okay, all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.